Hi, Roy here, and welcome again to another edition of the Right Has Left podcast. I am your host, Roy Garden, and we have got some breaking news on this podcast, so we want to go ahead and basically get right into it. In fact, this is going to be one of our top stories because this is kind of interesting news. And that is two federal judges ruled nearly simultaneously on Friday that President Donald Trump must, in fact, yes, they got to take care of that SNAP benefits. Yes, they do. So when they ruled yesterday that Trump's administration must continue to fund SNAP, the nation's biggest food aid program, using contingency funds during the government shutdown, the Department of Agriculture said, well, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and appeal that decision because we just don't think that's correct. Now, there has been billions in dollars that have been set aside for SNAP, just so you understand. But the Department of Agriculture said they refuse to use those contingency funds. In other words, the money is there for SNAP, but the Republicans like to blame the Democrats for, withholding all that. They like to play the blame game. Trump uses anything in his arsenal to make the Democrats look bad. And even though the money has been there to take care of SNAP, they absolutely refuse to get into it. And to me, folks, that is just kind of sad that you have to deal with that kind of attitude when people are needing food. And 1 out of every 7 Americans is on, SNAP benefits. Of course, the Democrats says, well, we're not going to release funds because all that does is just feed the illegal immigrants who are taking advantage of, things here in the United States to feed their family. And, not everybody's on SNAP, but that's not true. Many U.S. citizens, especially now with all these layoffs, people are out of jobs, they're out of work. And so they need to feed their family. I've got a lot of relatives that are on the SNAP benefits here in Florida, and they're not going to get anything. So the money's there. It's just that they refuse to touch it so they can blame the Democrats for not passing the big, beautiful bill, which, that's a whole nother story about the health benefits. So the rulings came a day before the U.S. Department of Agriculture planned to freeze payments to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or known as SNAP. And as I said, about 1 every 7 Americans is on SNAP. Now, what's going to happen here about all of this is obviously the Department of Agriculture is going to appeal this. They don't want to use the money even though it's there. They want to make they're thinking they're making the Democrats look bad by not getting fed. They said, well, they'll just pass this bill, SNAP would be there, which is BS. The money is there. People are starting to wake up. Now, beforehand, people who have very little critical thinking skills thought, well, this is a Democrat's fault. Well, it technically isn't. All the Democrats want is to continue with the Obamacare era health care systems and, get Medicare and Medicaid funded. Because if you haven't been looking since open enrollment's coming, in fact, it's here almost, and you have a limited window to get your health care benefits, have you looked how much you're going to be paying extra? Now, if you got hundreds and thousands of dollars, you probably didn't notice. If you're very rich or you're in the upper elite, you probably didn't notice. The average American, though, they are noticing how much their health care is going up. They're also noticing how much of those benefits have been cut back and how much more out-of-pocket expense you got to pay. Now, if you haven't been looking, you really need to look. So going back to this, SNAP benefits, that's just part of the whole equation where people can get fed. People are broke, all right? The economy is starting to go in the tank a little bit. I don't care how many numbers that, this present White House administration is trying to throw out there that the economy is great. Gas just yesterday went up 22 cents. Yes, it did. It was down to $2.79 here in Florida. It just shot right back up to $3 a gallon here in Indian River County. So, just telling you, they're going to appeal this. So even if they could tap into those emergency reserve funds, which billions of dollars are sitting there for the food benefits for SNAP. It's going to take another 2 weeks at the very minimum. If they, let's say they did it Monday and said, okay, we're going to go ahead and fund SNAP. Even if they did that, it would take 2 weeks to get to roll through the system to where you get your SNAP benefits. So if you were expecting SNAP benefits like, say, today, on this Saturday, I'm taping this on November 1st, you wouldn't even get it till the middle of November. So the longer it's delayed, the longer it's going to take you to get your SNAP benefits. So, and I can tell you right now, because they've already said it, the Department of Agriculture is going to appeal this to a higher court. Even though these judges said you got to release it, basically the Trump administration is saying, F you, we're just going to appeal it. We're not going to do crap because we want the Democrats to look bad. So that is the net of that. That's pretty damn scary, isn't it? All right, moving on to other news. In one of the most thorough legal rebukes in recent memory, more than 100 federal judges have now ruled at least 200 times that the Trump administration's effort to systematically detain immigrants facing possible deportation is violating their constitutional rights. So, and it's also violating their due process. And so, basically, according to Political, the rulings come from judges appointed by every president since Ronald Reagan. This includes 12 appointed by President Donald Trump. One of those appointees took the bench just last month, since July 8th, when Immigration and Customs Enforcement reversed 30 years of practice and determined that ICE must lock up everyone facing deportation, even if they've lived in the country for decades and have no criminal record. Federal courts have issued increasing warnings. The new ICE policy, they note, doesn't just subject millions more people to detention while they fight deportation. It also bars them from even asking an immigration judge to consider releasing them on bond. Courts around the country have since rejected the government's new interpretation. U.S. District Judge Kyle Dudek, a Florida-based Trump appointee, ruled Wednesday this court now joins the consensus. Other Trump-appointed judges who have ruled against the administration's position include Terry Doherty in Louisiana, Nancy Brazel in Minnesota, J.P. Hallon in Indiana, and Jason Pullman in Texas. Pullman ruled October 21st that one ICE detainee who had held without any individualized assessment of this dangerousness was deprived of his constitutional right for due process rights. The onslaught of legal rejections has come in hundreds of individual cases, typically filed on an emergency basis after ICE's targets are arrested at courthouses or check-ins with immigration officers. Though a handful of class action lawsuits have been filed seeking to block the administration's expanded detention policy, they have advanced slowly and seem weeks and weeks to get even heard, perhaps even months from resolution. Now, one case broke through this past Thursday, however, when U.S. District Judge Patty Sears, an appointee of Bill Clinton, approved a statewide class for immigrants in Massachusetts who are subject to the mandatory detention policy. So, now what I'm talking about all of this, of course, is due process. As they try to round up 3,000 so-called illegal immigrants a day, they are just basically picking them up, putting them in vans, and shipping them off to these detention centers around the U.S., and they are not getting due process. Many of these so-called illegal immigrants are U.S. citizens. Of course, as you know, Trump's tried even doing away with the birthright process. You know, if you're born in the United States, I don't give a crap. You're still, to me, you're an illegal alien. Get the hell out of here. So, you know, this whole thing started out, as you're well aware of we're going to arrest these who are bringing in fentanyl and drugs and, you know, felons and stuff. Okay, I get that, and maybe that's, you know, that's okay, if in fact they are. But as you're well aware of by the news coverage, which I'm going to get into a little bit later, that Trump's also trying to, you know, keep access away. They basically are showing women, children, you know, grandparents, elderly people, senior citizens getting thrown to the ground and picked up and arrested. Doesn't this remind you of 1939 Germany? Doesn't it? So, you know, these ICE agents have basically become Gestapo agents. And they are detaining and arresting anybody and everybody without even, you know, telling them who they are, not even giving them a due process, not reading their rights. They're just saying, in our view, you're illegal and we're getting you out of here. So, this is scary stuff, folks. It really is. And thank God for some of these judges, even Trump's own appointee, federal judges, saying they're not getting due process, and they deserve to get that. Now, a Department of Homeland Security spokesman noted that the administration's position was recently upheld by the Board of Immigration Appeals, an executive branch court that's policy for immigration judges, also appointed and overseen by the Trump administration. President Trump and Secretary Norman are now enforcing this law as it was actually written to keep America safe, said Tricia McKellen, who predicted appellate courts would side with the Trump administration. So that's probably true. Because he's got a very favorable Supreme Court and they outrule the Democrats that sit on the Supreme Court, Trump just continues to, every time a federal judge rules, he just continues to move it up the ladder until he gets the Supreme Court on his side, because he's bought and sold them, and where they say, oh, he's the president, he can do whatever he wants. If he doesn't want to give them due process, that's okay. They're illegal immigrants or criminals, and get them out of here. Even though they're hardworking families, 90% of them, they're simply trying to put food on the table, and they come over the border, maybe illegal, true, but they've been in here for like 40, 50 years, and they're just trying to feed their family because they can't get a decent job back home in South America or wherever they're from, Mexico. So they come over here and they do that. Now, I'm going to give you an example. I grew up in Wyoming, specifically Jackson, Wyoming. In the early 1980s, late 70s, a lot of Hispanic immigrants were coming to Jackson Hole because it pays very well. Even though the cost of living is extremely high, they would live about 10 to 15 in a house over the Teton Pass in Driggs and Victor, Idaho. They would go to Jackson every summer and to work because they get paid very well doing manual labor stuff. And then they would wire that money back home to their families in Mexico. Western Union became very popular there, and they were starting to convert a lot of things to Spanish reading so they could do that. You tell me what the hell is wrong with that, because Jackson can't even get people to work there that are work in America because there's no place for them to live. It's too expensive. There are summer jobs, basically, and college kids and high school kids would do that. But the manual labor stuff, still had a shortage of workforce. So, Hispanics got word of that and they came there and did that. I saw absolutely nothing wrong with that. And they're just putting food on there. These were good people. And the sheriff's department there would even tell you that. And the police department, the arrest rates of Hispanics was extremely low. But that's just an example. Not all these people are bad actors. They're really not. They're just trying to put food on the table. All right. Moving on. President Donald Trump revealed Monday that he underwent magnetic resonance imaging during his visit to Walter Reed Medical Center. Now, this is something else that's got going on in breaking news with President Trump. Now, during his visit to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center this month, Trump, who is now 79, didn't disclose the purpose of the MRI, saying that it was perfect. Of course he's going to say that. The White House previously said that only that Donald Trump underwent advanced imaging during the evaluation. I give you the full results, Trump told reporters aboard Air Force One on the way to Japan when he was asked whether he had received one that day. We had an MRI, and the machine, the whole thing, and it was perfect. Everything's perfect. Asked for additional details, Trump said, you can ask the doctors, adding, I think they gave you a very conclusive answer. Nobody has ever given you reports like I give you, and if I didn't think it was going to be good, either I would let you know negatively, I wouldn't run. I'd do something. But the doctor said some of the best reports for the age, some of the best reports they've ever seen. Yet in Japan, Trump looked lost and confused several times with aides helping him get back to where he was supposed to be, as you see this video that's now running over me. He looked extremely confused. And again, I sometimes, he made a lot of fun of Joe Biden, and now he is getting, as you watch him on cameras, just as bad, if not worse, than Joe Biden. He rambles on with long speeches. He sometimes gets completely off track if he, from the teleprompter, if he doesn't stay focused on that, and then he starts talking about things that make absolutely no sense. So you can see Donald Trump many times looks like cognitively he is confused and doesn't know where to go. And I don't know. You be the final judge, but there are a lot more and more people that's saying that, his advanced age is starting to get the best of him, the stress of being the president, and so I only you folks can make those kinds of ideas and judgment as to what's going on with Donald Trump. I'm not an expert, but I can tell you right now, there are many psychologists who have been interviewed and have watched and have, examined independently Donald Trump's cognitive abilities and his memory, and they all say the same thing. It's starting to decline. Now, whether he's getting into full-blown dementia, of course not. But he's getting forgetful. He sometimes doesn't even know what country he's in. He's several times said Puerto Rico, the president of Puerto Rico. He doesn't even realize that's a U.S. possession. It's the U.S. Virgin Islands. He's messed that up. And a president is supposed to know all these things. So just have to wait and see. But there you go. All right. The Senate has failed for the 13th time to advance a bill to reopen the government as the shutdown continues into now nearly a month. In fact, it's almost a month now. It's almost ready to break records as to being the longest government shutdown ever. As the shutdown continues, a motion to take up the House-passed short-term spending bill required 60 votes for approval and lacked support from most Democrats. The Democratic leaders from more than 24 states, of course, as I just mentioned earlier, suing the Department of Agriculture over the suspension of the Federal Nutrition Assistance Program as SNAP, because the money's there to fund SNAP. They have a huge reserve backup, and the Department of Agriculture refuses to do it because they want to see the Americans suffer, and they want to play the blame game in politics and blame the Democrats. So you can easily see that all of this is becoming terribly tragic. We have gotten thousands now of federal workers that are getting laid off. You have got air traffic controllers that are now working without pay. You've got military personnel working without pay. And it's just becoming a huge circus. And I know the Republicans love to blame the Democrats, and the Democrats love to blame the Republicans. Now, I basically am, not because you think I'm just all pro-Democrat and stuff and things like that, but the Democrats are asking for one thing and one thing only: keep Obamacare funded and keep Medicare and Medicare and Medicaid funded. So basically three things, but it all boils down to health care. That's really what it is. And the SNAP program, like I said, the money's there. They just don't want to touch it, even though federal judges have said you've got to release that money for the SNAP benefits. They're not going to do it. So it's a blame game. The big, beautiful bill that the Republicans want to pass, is just more and more funding for ICE, and they took all the money from healthcare and put it into the ICE and border control and stuff like that. That's where all the money went. You can look at it up yourself. And of course, more tax cuts for the wealthy. So, people don't get this. Even the poorest of Republicans don't use critical thinking skills and say, well, that's great. We got to get those up. But now that food stamps have run out, these same people have supported Donald Trump, that unfortunately may not be working, or they don't have a college education and stuff. When it starts affecting them, then they start raising questions, and they try to go to Uncle Joe or Aunt Beth or whatever and say, can I borrow some money to put food on my table? And everybody said, hey, you put him in office, I didn't. So It's kind of interesting because of all of the stuff that's going on with SNAP and not touching the reserve funds. So I find it kind of interesting that you see this stuff going on. I really do. And it's sad that it has to come to this, that people are hurting, and it breaks my heart, and it has drawn on this long. But you get people like the Republican Party, they just, because they've got money, they're getting what they want, they don't care. I got my health care, I got my paycheck. I'm in Congress, I'm getting paid. We, the Republicans, are fighting for you. That's okay. You blame the Democrats. Sure, we got reserve funds there, but we're not going to touch it because we want to see you suffer, because we want to blame the Democrats. It's their fault that money's not there, and because they're not hurting. All right. They got all the food they want. They got their paychecks coming in. They got their health care paid by you, the taxpayers. They don't care. So, as long as they got money and stuff, and they're not hurting and they're not seeing what you're going through, they don't care. And the Democrats, they may break down and give in. I don't know. I know they're starting to get some negotiations going, according to the latest news reports. There are some behind the scenes working now to where they may fund, Obamacare and on a short-term basis, and Medicare and Medicaid to get the bill signed. Even people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is one of Trump's biggest supporters, is breaking down and siding with the Democrats. We got to do something. This crap's got to stop. Quit playing like you're at fourth grade, and I know those with the most marbles wins. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. But we'll have to. I really think that things are going to start breaking down here soon. Now, the Trump administration is also reassigning at least half the top leadership at Immigration and Customs Enforcement around the country in a major shakeup of the agencies responsible for carrying out the president's vision of mass deportations, according to one current and former U.S. government official. The current official, who was authorized not to speak publicly on the matter and spoke on the condition of anonymity, said that 12 ICE field directors, the officers who run the network of field offices around the country responsible for immigration enforcement, were being reassigned. Half are to be replaced by existing or retired Customs and Border Protection staff, while the other half would be replaced by ICE officers, both the current and the former officials said. Now, the changes were initiated by the Homeland Security Department, the current official said, without specifying which cities were being impacted. The former official, who has direct knowledge of the changes and spoke on the condition of not having their names released, as just said, to discuss the information, was not intended for public release, said on top of the 12 reassignments leaders in other 4 cities were being swapped out through retirement or other circumstances. The key word, other circumstances. Now, why do you suppose they are being reassigned? Well, I can tell you why they're being reassigned. They're not arresting and deporting enough people. That's why they're being reassigned. The ICE agents are supposed to be taking down at least 3,000 people a day. So they say. So that's what's going on. And it's not happening. They want more and more and more people of brown skin out of here. So that's really what's going on. It's kind of sad, but this is why they're doing the shakeup, folks, is because they're not deporting enough. They want more and more people out of here. And again, they're not doing their job in Democratic-led cities such as Chicago, Los Angeles, and Washington. So this is why they're doing the major shakeup. They're not doing things on a larger scale like they want. And, the hell with due process, the hell with laws, get them out of here. That's basically, this is all Project 2025. And like I said, you can't tell me that when you're taking down 3,000 illegal immigrants a day, or immigrants that may not even be illegal, that every single one of them are criminals bringing drugs in. You're telling me that a 9-year-old child is smuggling drugs in and stuff? Folks, see, this is what's happening. You know, even our young people are starting to get indoctrinated in all this. You know, white privilege, white supremacy, you know, rich and people and white first, everybody else comes second. And it's sad. You know, this is not the country that I grew up in. And I hope to heck that things change. But it's getting scary. In the 1939 Germany, that's what we're turning into. You can talk to whoever you want. This is not what our country is supposed to be. You know, it's a song that I used to know when I was in a group called Up With People. You know, what color is God's skin? It's black, brown, it's yellow, it is red, it is white. Everyone's the same in the good Lord's sight. That's true, you know, but not according to this current administration. We're not all the same. White's best, everybody else is second. So you know, moving on with this news story. So this is not only reflecting to ICE, it's also reflecting to the National Guard. It's also moving on with those folks. The National Guard is also affected by this current policy as set up by the Trump administration. Now, the National Guard, as you know, are being federalized, and Border Patrol agents are now trying to blend in the National Guard with in the Los Angeles immigration operation, and they're trying to move it to Chicago as well. He added that ICE leadership has been discussing the changes with migration to the National Guard with other Trump administration officials for some time as part of a broad review of the agency. The reason for the personnel changes was not immediately clear, but they indicate a greater integration of Border Patrol agents and ICE at the same time with Customs and Border Patrol protection, as well as the National Guard. And so, you know, to federalize National Guard people to, you know, work within the United States. In other words, militarization of the United States is becoming more and more a reality, where you're going to see armed soldiers at our airports and stuff, just like you see in North Korea, just like you see in other third world countries, you know. Can you imagine now landing in LAX and you're seeing people in cameo with M15 rifles and stuff staring down at your face? Welcome to America. It's sad. It really is. As this goes on, the Trump administration is also planning to replace some regional leaders in immigrations and customs enforcement, which I just talked about. And they're also, as I said, you know, they want more aggressive tactics. That's what's going on here. And to summarize this story, when I say more aggressive tactics, Trump wants to see people jumping out of Black Hawk helicopters and jumping out of rental trucks and Home Depot parking lots, like you've already seen. He loves it when he sees all these people just throwing down people to the ground and arresting them and hauling them off in U-Haul vans. I can't even believe U-Haul has the audacity to rent these vehicles to these people. I really don't. You see their name on there, and more and more people now are starting to boycott U-Haul because of that. It breaks my heart to see this kind of crap. It really does. And I don't know where to go with all this when you've seen all this aggressive takedown of people like this. You know, it all started out, you know, he sold the whole idea that we want to get people who are coming over the border illegally that are, you know, drug dealers and escapees from, and he, you know, the people bought that hook, line, and sinker. And then when they started arresting thousands of others, people are starting to raise their eyebrows. Well, you mean to tell me that 70-year-old woman and those children are all bringing in fentanyl and they're all felons? You know, it's no, they're not. All right, moving on to other news. So let's talk a little bit about AOC here. Let's get into something a little lighter here. So President Donald Trump challenged Republican Jasmine Crockett, who he deemed low IQ, to intelligence test to see who comes out best And Trump then again not only took aim at Crockett along, but she also took on fellow Democratic Representative AOC, Alexander Ocasio-Cortez. And while speaking at reporters en route to Pittsburgh ahead of a summit on energy and artificial intelligence. So AOC, look, I think she's very nice, but she's got a very low IQ, and we really don't need low IQ in this administration. Trump began his rant per the Independent between her and Crockett. We're going to give them both an IQ test to see who comes out best, he added, the Texas Congresswoman, Jasmine. And then, of course, he went on New York's reps, AOC. Now, I took my test. I took a real test at Walter Reed Medical Center, and I aced it. I got every one of those questions right. Now it's time for them to take the test. This isn't the first time, though, Trump has aimed at Crockett's intelligence as well as AOC's. During an interview with NBC News on Meet the Press earlier this year, Trump targeted Crockett while speaking about the Democratic Party, which he said in total disarray. They have a new person named Crockett. I watched her speak the other day. She's definitely a low IQ person, and they said she's the future of the party, Trump said at one time. So, and then, of course, AOC, she actually did take the test, and she was mentioned about, I wonder if Trump got all the numbers right when they told her what time was it on the face of the clock. The test, which is actually a Canadian test that they take for these people to make sure that they're not slipping into dementia and things like that. They ask you, they'll say, banana, chair, and yellow, and remember those three words, and then they'll go on and do other things, and 20 minutes later they'll come back to you. What were those three words that I told you to remember? I mean, I've taken that test. Okay, when you become a senior, they do this just to make sure your memory, cognitive, is still there. So, and then you do have to draw on a face of a clock, put down 3:15. I mean, sadly, I hope they still do this, because in grade school today, with everything being digital, I don't even know if kids even more draw faces on the clock. When they look at their digital watch, they see 3:35 or 3:45. They don't know how to draw a clock face. But anyway, it was funny. AOC did kind of bring that out and said, I did well. I wonder how well Donald Trump did. So... Yeah, she's a firecracker. So New York's intermediate appellate court should overturn President Donald Trump's criminal hush money convictions, because this trial was fatally marred by faulty evidence and overseen by a judge who should have recused himself. So this is what Donald Trump's attorneys are saying. This story is relation to Donald Trump is now trying to get the federal charges against him. He's a 34-count convicted felon, in case you forgot. Now he wants all those charges dropped because he said, I'm president of the United States and I shouldn't have that on my record. And so his attorneys are trying to fight in appellate court to overturn those charges. When a Manhattan jury found him guilty of 34 counts, he said it was a rigged trial, and I'm the president and I shouldn't have this on my record. And, the prosecutors did catch him in the scheme that he tried to conceal $130,000 payments to his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, made to an adult film star actress Stormy Daniels to keep her from talking about a long-denied affair ahead of the 2016 presidential election. He is found guilty of that. He paid the hush money to Stormy, and when she was on the stand there, she described in specific detail about the encounter. And of course, Trump, I'm the president. I can do whatever I want. I'm Donald J. Trump. I can do whatever I want. I got more power. I'm the most powerful man in the world. So anyway, those charges did stick, and now he's trying to get them all barred and released from him. So he doesn't have to, have those charges on him. I don't think he stands a chance in hell with this case, because it was pretty cut and dried, and but we'll have to wait and see what happens. So, other things that are going on in the news that is quite of interest, and this has to do with Caroline Leavitt and the White House press corps. And this is going back to Trump's behavior. When I say behavior, things that are going on with him when he is being photographed by the media via videotape or still photography, and the stories that they're covering, Trump is more and more trying to control the media. He wants a state-controlled media. So now, this is what's going on. Members of the media who cover the White House will no longer have free access to the office of the West Wing used by communications staff, the Trump administration said Friday. Now, you already know Pete Hegseth has thrown out all the press out of the Pentagon. And even Fox News, took part in that, to where they protested and got all their stuff and got out, and now covering the Pentagon from outside. They still have their sources, believe it or not, and Hegseth can't do anything about that. So now this same thing is going on to the West Wing of the White House. They're trying to rein in the press corps. Reporters seeking to speak with the White House officials in the office will now need an appointment, according to a memo released Friday by the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt and Stephen Shong, the communications director, both of whom work in the now restricted area. The White House said the move was motivated by recent structural changes that require communications staff to be responsible for matters pertaining to the National Security Council. In this capacity, members of the White House communications staff are routinely engaging with sensitive material, the memo said. But the change appears to also reflect White House limits on journalists that have included excluding certain news organizations from closed briefings and events, and imposing a new set of rules and restrictions at the Pentagon that drove most of the reporters who worked there to turn in their media badges and cover the military from outside the headquarters building. I was referring to that earlier with the Pentagon. So President Donald Trump has also floated the possibility of moving the press corps off the White House grounds. We have an option here, Trump said earlier this month. We could move them very easily across the street. Under the new news rules, reporters will maintain regular access to a separate office, which is joined to the briefing room where lower-level communication staffs are located, the memo said. The White House Correspondents Association president, Wei Zhang, said in a statement, the new limits hinder the press's corps' ability to question officials, ensure transparency, and hold the government accountable to the determinant of the American public. In a social media post, Zhang justified the restrictions by claiming White House reporters have secretly recorded video and audio of the West Wing office, entered restricted rooms in the West Wing, and eavesdropped on private meetings earlier this year. And the White House sought to ban the Associated Press from covering White House events after the news organization declined to refer to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. I still call it the Gulf of America. I don't know, stupid names there. Following Trump's executive order to change the name, a federal judge ruled the White House could not legally block AP from the White House events, but the outlet's access remains limited as the White House seeks an appeal. Trump has separately pursued legal action against several media outlets and viewed them covering him negatively, and Republican allies unfavorably. So, what this all comes down to, and my degree is in broadcast journalism, although I'm retired and not doing things like this podcast. The press has, the freedom of the press is the most precious thing that we enjoy here in the United States. Whether you are covered as a public figure negatively or positively or in between, the press and the people have the right to know. I understand, certain classified information, but according to this White House, everything is classified. There is nothing more scarier than seeing a state-controlled media. In other words, cover me positively or don't cover me at all, and I'll make sure you don't cover me at all. You need to make me this shine and smile, and everything I do is gold, or you're going to pay for it. And that's what's going on, ladies and gentlemen. Is the fact of the matter is they want things like this to be positive, or you don't cover it. And a state-controlled media in the United States, I thought I'd never, ever, ever see it. And that's where we're getting to. This brings me to my next story here, because this does have a tie-in with it, is the head of CNN reportedly wants his network to tone down the coverage of President Trump destroying the White House East Wing as he builds his enormous ballroom. So this is also coming into the news. And Status reports that CNN CEO Mark Thompson told his staffers on a conference call Thursday to reduce the network's coverage of the White House destruction one day after he had paid a visit to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Now, why is this happening? Same thing with CBS and Paramount and Skydance. Same thing with these folks here now at CNN. CNN is trying to do some more business and transferring some streaming platforms and things like that. He wants the favor of the FCC to get the favor of the FCC. Donald Trump's guy is appointed in there. Well, Donald Trump said it again. Tone down your coverage of things that I do, and maybe we can make that happen. It's pay for play, And now CNN, unfortunately, is getting into it. This destruction of the East Wing of the White House for Trump's so-called ballroom that is being paid for supposedly by private funds, and people donating millions to that. Again, a lot of people are saying it's a pay to play. We'll give you the money. What are you going to do for us? You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And now it's coming down to CNN. So he's told these people to tone down what's going on with the East Wing and all the construction and destruction, and that's because they've got some behind the scenes deal going on. So again, even though we're supposed to have freedom of the press, when these corporations, Time Warner and all that, start getting into where they got to do some deals, well, Trump calls them on the carpet. And he has gotten so much power, and the FCC, which is supposed to be kind of an independent agency of doing, the whole thing of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, was making sure that media, even though it has changed dramatically from analog to digital, is that they're doing things in the public interest. And because a lot of them gotten so large and are buying and selling off stuff and stock and streaming services as we are now in this new digital age, well, the FCC is no longer kind of that agency. It's now like the FCC is Donald Trump. That's what it is. And you got to go to Trump, and if you want something done, this is what you're going to do for me. And so he basically takes all these broadcast networks and turning them into state-run agencies of you show things in my favor, and I'll see that you get what you want. You talk to me in a negative tone, you're not going to get nothing. And that's sad that the freedom of the press is slowly disintegrating. And I don't like it, but there's absolutely nothing that you can do as far as what's going on there. Turning lastly to state news and Governor Ron DeSantis. So, Ron DeSantis announced a partnership with Turning Point USA to ensure high school students in Florida start campus chapters of the conservative youth organization founded by political commentator Charlie Kirk, who was unfortunately slain in early September. At an October 27th press conference in Sarasota, DeSantis said any high school student who wants to start a Club America chapter, the high school chapters for Turning Point should be able and allowed to start one. If any issues arise, DeSantis warned that the Florida officials will get involved. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced this recently, and that's all fine and dandy. Again, students should have the right to have whatever organization they so desire. And if they want to start a Turning Point chapter, in my opinion, that's great. However, so this is what's going on. Ron DeSantis wants to really push forward and have these Turning Point USA chapters started, and that's okay. No problem. I was once a member of the Young Republicans myself, and we didn't have groups on school campuses because politics and the education in public schools should be somewhat separated. But here's the point. Great to have that chapter. So what happens if an LGBTQ student group wants to start a chapter, a community chapter? What happens if, let's say, liberal thinking students want to start a chapter? DeSantis won't allow that. You know damn well he won't allow that. We can't have that. No, that's terrible. Can't do that. We can't have anything to do with DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. But you can have a Turning Point chapter. That's great. Let's have that. In other words, you think conservative or you don't get nothing at all. That's what it boils down to. And, you think our way or the highway or you don't have nothing. My way's right, your way is wrong. And so it's again, if you're going to allow Turning Point USA, fine. But you also need to allow other young people's organizations to be on campus as well. I mean, DeSantis is now allowing, pay-for-profit schools to operate within the high schools now. Charter schools is what that basically goes to. He's changed a lot of where charter schools can now use public school grounds and properties to operate their schools. Money from that used to support public schools has now been diverted to charter schools. And again, Charlie Kirk was very controversial. It is god-awful sad that he was assassinated like it was. Nothing can take that away. But his discussions were very controversial and things got aggressive and heated. And I can understand that. But Ron, great. Let's have those chapters. Let this more power to you. Let's have those chapters. But you also have to allow the opposing view also on those same campuses, whether it be LGBTQ, whether it be a diversity of, say, a Democratic Party of young people's group that maybe have liberal thinking. They should be allowed to be on the same thing. You cannot single out and cherry pick what you want. That's the bottom line. What's good for the goose is good for the gander type of thing. If you want Turning Point USA on the high school chapters and campuses, that is absolutely great. Go for it. But you also have to give equal footing and equal opportunities to other organizations that may oppose Turning Point, that may have students with, different gender classifications, LGBTQ. If they want a chapter on campus, you got to allow that too. You just can't say, cherry pick. You can go, you can't. You can, you can't. You can, you can't. That is illegal as all hell. This is not what America was founded on. So I wrap up with that. Thank you for joining me on this edition of The Right Has Left. I am your host, Roy Garden. Again, in summary, I was a Republican for over 51 years. I was a member of the Young Republican Party. I kind of went a different direction because I think America right now is in a huge mess, and I don't agree with what's going on in this country right now, as millions of other Americans or so. And I pray to God that our people get those food stamps and SNAP benefits. And I pray we save our Medicare and Medicaid insurance, because I've already seen the numbers, folks. They are going up, and it's going to come right out of your pocket, and you may not even be able to afford health care. So until next time, you try to have a good week. Take care.